Imagine you're out on a walk in the dead of winter. You're bundled up, your head is down against the wind, and you are just trying to get from point A to point B without freezing.
Right, you're just totally locked inside your own head, in your own little survival bubble.
Exactly. But suddenly, the wind shifts, and the air smells sharply, unmistakably, of peppermint candy.
Which is such an oddly specific thing to smell out in the middle of nowhere.
It is, and for most of us, that's just a pleasant, kind of random scent, maybe a quick reminder of the holidays. But what if I told you that, in the right context, that specific scent is actually a highly engineered psychological trigger?
Yeah, a mechanism that's literally designed to break you out of your isolation and force you to, pay attention to the world around you.
Right. And welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. Our mission today is to explore a really fascinating piece of narrative text titled The Peppermint Forest Express, A Journey of Kindness.
And we are going to unpack how this story uses these highly sensory magical elements to do something pretty incredible.
Yeah, like a literal train made of candy.
Exactly. It uses that to deliver this structured, step-by-step masterclass on community building, problem solving, and basically the nuts and bolts of empathy.
Because usually when we talk about teaching complex social dynamics, things like civic responsibility or empathy, there's this assumption that it has to be a heavy, tedious process.
Oh, absolutely. We tend to moralize the concept of community. Like, we treat empathy as a dry, ethical obligation rather than this organic, deeply rewarding human experience.
It's like sitting down to read a municipal zoning manual and just hoping it magically inspires you to care about your neighbors.
Yeah, and when you frame it as an obligation, people naturally put their guards up. They just tune it out.
They totally do. But today, we are taking a completely different route. We're looking at a text that makes helping others look, well, sweet.
Literally sweet.
Right. So let's set the scene and establish the baseline. We've got 4 children, Mia, Max, Harper, and Toby. They are wandering through a snowy landscape called Maple Hollow Forest.
Just a completely mundane afternoon for them.
Yep. And then they encounter this massive shiny train made of peppermint candy canes. The tracks are sparkling sugar crystals. The engine is puffing out these, like, mint swirl clouds.
That's a very vivid image.
It is. And honestly, my immediate reaction to this was a bit of skepticism. I thought, isn't constructing a massive vehicle out of candy just a cheap gimmick?
Just a sugar rush.
Exactly. It feels a bit fluffy instead of a real lesson about responsibility.
Well, I completely understand that reaction. It feels frivolous at first glance. But if we look at the psychology of that narrative choice, the candy isn't a gimmick at all. No, it's a very deliberate framing device. Because if you want to teach someone, whether it's a child or an adult, about the heavy lifting of civic duty, starting with a ledger of responsibilities just triggers immediate cognitive resistance.
Okay, that makes sense. You just don't want to do it.
Right. So the candy train bypasses the brain's defense mechanisms entirely. It instantly disarms the children and frames the concept of helping others not as a chore, but as something inherently enticing.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is brilliant. It lowers the barrier to entry. But what really fascinated me was how they're drawn to it in the first place.
The smell on the wind?
Yes. It goes back to what we were talking about at the start. Harper literally sniffs the frosty breeze and asks, "Do you smell that?"
It's the olfactory hook. What's fascinating here is that smell is the sense most directly wired to the emotional and memory centers of the brain. The amygdala and the hippocampus.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. So by introducing the anomaly through a sharp, distinct scent like peppermint, the text basically bypasses the logical, analytical brain. It immediately engages the instinctual brain.
I look at it almost like a modern-day push notification, but an environmental one.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Think about how it works neurologically. When your phone buzzes in your pocket, it completely hijacks your attention, right? It pulls you out of your default state.
It creates that dopamine loop that demands you check it.
Exactly. That sudden smell of peppermint on a cold winter breeze does the exact same thing to these kids. It's a sensory alert, pulling them out of their ordinary walk and into a specific purpose.
It disrupts their status quo. But here is the critical difference between a digital push notification and what this story is doing.
What's that?
A digital notification usually prompts you to consume something, like read a text, watch a video, buy a product. The text flips that script the moment the authority figure appears.
Ah, yes. Conductor Minty, he pops out of the front car, tips his candy-striped hat, and welcomes them.
But he doesn't just offer them a joyride, he explicitly states a deficit.
Right? He says, this train delivers winter cheer to the forest, but today we're short on helpers.
Short on helpers. That is such a fascinating rhetorical move. By doing so, he shifts the agency entirely onto the children.
He's the guy driving the magical reality-bending train, but he's telling four ordinary kids that he needs them.
Exactly. He transforms them from passive observers of magic into active, essential participants. If he had just offered a ride, the story stalls out.
The magic stops right there.
Right. By creating that deficit, he demands contribution.
And Mia immediately volunteers the group. They buy in. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because once they're on the train, we move from the promise of helping to the actual gritty mechanics of it.
The implementation phase.
Right. And I have to admit, I went into this expecting a fairy godmother situation. They find someone with a problem, the magical train shoots a beam of sparkly light, and everything is fixed while the kids just stand around and watch.
The illusion of the magical fix. We see that in media all the time.
Exactly. But that is not what happens at all. The story tackles what are essentially fundamental infrastructure problems.
Yeah, if we look at the first two stops, they perfectly illustrate this.
Let's talk about those. First, they arrive at the Frosty Rabbit Hollow. The rabbits are freezing, sure, but their real problem is that their carrot garden is frozen solid.
Their food supply is cut off. It's literally an agricultural crisis.
Then, at the next stop, the Sleepy Owl Tree, there's a baby owl that has lost its nest. A housing crisis.
We are dealing with food and shelter, the absolute base layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
And how does the narrative choose to solve those physiological and safety needs? Not with an invisible magic wand.
No, it provides practical, tangible tools.
Max opens the train's cargo box, and he finds peppermint warming stones. The kids have to physically take these stones and manually melt the frozen soil so the tiny green sprouts can peek through.
And at the owl tree,
Harper finds twigs and pine needles inside a crate. The kids have to use their own hands to physically rebuild that cozy nest high up in the branches. The magic just provides the raw materials.
if we connect this to the bigger picture, these two stops perfectly illustrate two of the text's core lessons. Helping others spreads happiness, and teamwork solves problems.
Because it requires actual physical labor from the kids.
Exactly. It's a profound statement on the nature of empathy. True empathy isn't just wishing someone well or sending thoughts and prayers to the freezing rabbits. Empathy requires tangible, practical intervention.
It requires sweat equity.
Yes. The warming stones and the twigs represent capital, resources. But resources are inert without human effort to apply them.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though. If the goal of the text is to teach real-world problem solving, isn't giving the kids magical warming stones still a bit of a cheat code?
How do you mean?
Well, in reality, if your neighbor's pipes freeze in the winter, you don't have a glowing peppermint rock to hand them. Doesn't the inclusion of the magical tools kind of undermine the lesson about doing the hard work?
I see where you're coming from, but we have to look at what the magical tools represent metaphorically. In the real world, a magical tool might be a community block grant or a specialized piece of equipment you borrowed from the city.
Or even just a certain influx of willing volunteers.
Exactly. The story is acknowledging a hard truth, which is that you cannot always fix systemic problems bare-handed. You need resources. But the core lesson remains perfectly intact because having the resources is only step one.
The kids still have to do the work.
Right. The rabbits didn't thaw their own garden. The children had to act as the physical conduit between the resource and the solution.
Okay, I get that. It bridges the gap between having the means and actually applying the effort.
Yeah.
And the story gives us this brilliant, direct, mechanical feedback loop to reinforce that.
Yes, the glowing engine.
Right. After the kids do the physical work of hauling twigs up the pine tree to build the nest, Conductor Minty whispers, "Kindness powers the Peppermint Forest Express." And the text specifically notes that the train engine actually glows brighter.
It establishes a direct relationship between physical effort and systemic energy. The physical acts of kindness act as literal fuel. It takes a completely abstract concept like kindness and makes it visible.
The more you put in, the brighter things get.
Yeah.
But, if the story stopped there, it would just be a manual on crisis management.
True. We've solved the food shortage, we've solved the housing crisis.
Right. But then we arrive at the third major theme of the text, and it completely shifts gears from survival to social cohesion.
This brings us to the quiet clearing.
Yes, the final stop. The train pulls up to the quiet clearing, and there is a gathering of vastly different forest animals. But here's the thing, they aren't starving. They aren't freezing to death.
Their basic survival needs are met.
but they are completely isolated from one another. The text describes this heavy social paralysis. Nobody knows how to interact or play.
This raises an important question. What truly makes a community thrive? We've established that physical infrastructure is the baseline, but survival is not the same thing as a community.
Exactly. So Toby, one of the kids, looks at this tense, awkward gathering and just yells, "Let's build a giant snow fort."
Which is such a massive pivot from the previous stops. It posits that it's not enough to just be fed and housed. Shared joy and play are essential.
But why a snow fort? That was my first thought. Why not have them sit in a circle and share their winter supplies? Building a fort is just unstructured play.
It might seem frivolous, but sociologically speaking, Toby's simple idea acts as the perfect catalyst. Play is arguably the most powerful mechanism we have for breaking down in-group and out-group dynamics.
Because it lowers the stakes.
Exactly. Unstructured play requires vulnerability, it requires cooperation, and it has absolutely zero life or death stakes. That lack of stakes is what shatters the social paralysis of the quiet clearing.
It reminds me of community barn raising, but solely for the purpose of play.
That's a perfect analogy.
Because the text brings together vastly different species. You have foxes stacking the snow, squirrels running around carrying pine cones, and birds flying in to decorate the fort with berries.
Species that would normally ignore each other are coordinating their unique abilities toward a single joyful goal.
It's incredible. And the result of that shared experience is that laughter literally fills the forest. And how does the train react to this?
It reaches its absolute peak power.
Right. It sparkles like a glowing candy lantern. It maxes out on fuel, which directly supports the text's explicit lessons that kindness makes community stronger and sharing joy creates friendship.
Overcoming social isolation generates just as much power as overcoming physical hardship. It equalizes the value of emotional infrastructure and physical infrastructure.
So the garden's thawed, the nest is built, the animals are playing together. The journey is basically wrapping up. But this brings us to our final theme, the legacy of the journey.
Because the story has to ensure the lessons outlast the physical presence of the magical train.
Right. The train can't stay in Maple Hollow forever. So as the journey concludes, Conductor Minty does something very specific. He hands each of the 4 children a tiny peppermint ticket.
And this is where the psychological brilliance really shines.
Well, knowing the candy theme, my brain immediately went to Willy Wonka. I thought, oh, it's a golden ticket. It's a VIP pass for a free ride next winter.
Which would completely undermine the entire point of the story.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? The peppermint ticket isn't a pass for a free ride at all.
No, it's a symbolic contract. Minty explains that the ticket reminds them that kindness keeps the train running. He literally says, every time you help someone, another journey begins.
It places the responsibility of generating future journeys squarely on the children's shoulders through their everyday actions.
Precisely. It reiterates the final summary of the text. The sweetest journeys are powered by kindness and teamwork. He is transferring the agency back to them.
And then the train chugs away into the woods. But the text leaves us with this incredible final detail. Whenever the kids smell peppermint in the winter air, they know the train is nearby, spreading cheer.
It circles all the way back to that sensory hook from the very beginning.
The push notification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tying the magic to the scent of peppermint is brilliant because it leaves the children and the reader with a permanent real-world environmental trigger.
So you literally can't escape the lesson.
Right. You smell a common winter scent, and your brain associates it with this act of empathy. It constantly reminds them of their ability to enact positive change.
It really is a masterclass. I mean, to briefly recap for you listening, we've gone from a cold, isolated winter walk to understanding the psychology of moving from passive observation to active community building.
From thawing a frozen garden with practical tools to uniting an entire forest in unstructured play.
All of it hidden inside a seemingly simple story about a candy train. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over, based strictly on the mechanics of the text we just discussed.
There's definitely a lingering implication here.
Right. The story establishes early on that Conductor Minty is short on helpers. And later, it reveals that kindness is the literal fuel that makes the engine glow and the train run.
Which means the magic isn't an infinite resource.
Exactly. This implies that the magic of the Peppermint Forest Express isn't self-sustaining at all. It is entirely dependent on ordinary people choosing to step up. So without that voluntary human action, without people willing to do the sweat equity of empathy, the magic of the forest literally stalls. The train stops running. It's up to us to keep the engine glowing.